Well, hello and welcome to the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast. I am Amanda McCrossin here with two of my favorite people from Wine Access. One, of course, you've already met on this show, Miss Vanessa Conlin. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Very excited about our guest and the wines today.
Yes, me too. We've been so super excited about this shipment. So this is an especially fun episode. And before I introduce our second guest, I just want to point out that this episode actually was the result of a suggestion that someone made via our Instagram. And I'm so grateful for all of those suggestions that come in. So thank you for sending them in, because it really does help us figure out what you guys want to learn about. So if there are topics that are interesting for you, shoot us a DM, put them in the comments. However you want to make that happen, you should do it. We are talking about how to assess wine like a pro, and who better to join us to do so than Mr. Sur Lucero, a Krug Cup recipient, a master sommelier. He is on the wine team at Wine Access. He's worked at the best restaurants in the world, and he's joining us today to talk about how we actually assess wine for our job, which is drinking wine. What's up, sir?
Hey, Amanda. Hi, Vanessa. Thanks for the nice introduction. I'm excited. We have two fantastic wines today, so that's always fun to start out 10 a.m. in the morning, start drinking some wine and get paid for it. Gotta love that.
Yeah. Pretty normal time for us to be assessing wine professionally, at least. So Vanessa's a master of wine. Sir is a master sommelier. So both have incredible pedigrees and have been through these very grueling tasting exams. So, and then of course, I went through the Court of Master Sommeliers as well. So I'm familiar with what's called the grid. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. If you don't know about the grid.
State that. That's great. The grid.
The grid.
The grid. You ask any sommelier about the grid and they're like, oh, the grid. But we will talk about that today. And if you want to kind of taste along with this, I encourage you to look at said grid. There'll be a link in the description so you can kind of follow along. But I think one of the things I want to start with is, why we're actually doing this, aside from the fact that someone requested it. You guys know what it's like to taste wine professionally now, but you also know what it's like to have never tasted wine professionally, and to kind of go from A to B, at least for me, really helped me to understand wine, not only as a professional, but also as a consumer, how to better assess things. Elizabeth Schneider from the Wine for Normal People podcast, she has a great quote: the more you know about wine, usually the less you spend and the better stuff you get. So even if you don't want to go the professional route, learning how to properly or professionally taste wine is always a great skill to have. Do you guys feel the same way?
I do. And I feel like even if, you're not going a professional route, I think it just helps you really understand what you like, and also how to then describe what you want. Let's say if you're in a retail store or you're at a restaurant and you're talking to the sommelier, I think it helps you really communicate what you like and don't like about wine.
Absolutely. Sarah, you feel the same?
When you use the same approach to kind of like looking at a wine each time, irrespective of which wine you're tasting, you actually really begin to start making connections between the different wines, and these aha moments kind of come in. And all of those aha moments, when you all of a sudden learn something for the first time, are so exciting. I'm a little envious of beginners that begin tasting. And as much as I loved developing my palate, I kind of miss those aha moments, because they used to happen all the time, and now they're kind of few and far between. And but luckily, all the wine is still delicious.
Let's talk about what's going on in the world of cultural wine events, starting with, in our own backyard of Napa Valley, the Tokelon Vineyard has officially achieved organic certification. Did you guys hear about this?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Very exciting stuff. Yeah. So Constellation Brands celebrates organic certification. I think it's important to note that there are, how would we phrase this at this point? How many different sides of Tokelon Vineyard are there? I mean, we've got the Beckstoffer side, we've got the Constellation side, which is of course part of the Mondavi, and then you've got a few other parcels like McDonald that are officially Tokelon, but not legally allowed to call it Tokelon. So it's a little bit complicated. So for the purposes of this conversation, what we're talking about being certified organic is the Constellation side, which is the Robert Mondavi side. It's a huge step in the right direction. I'm really excited to see this. I mean, obviously, we've seen a ton of vineyards in Napa Valley and around California go organic, but what do you guys think for industry at large, and especially for California, what this means?
I think what's really great about this is the the sort of name recognition of To Kalon Vineyard, I think goes a
Yeah.
long way. I mean, I think most consumers who are collecting Napa Valley or have visited Napa Valley at least have heard this, and they understand what an important and iconic vineyard this is. So I think it's great. And I really hope this inspires not just other vintners in Napa Valley, but vintners, around the world to follow suit.
I think when people realize how much the investment is to actually have a piece of land and a piece of vineyard here in this valley, they want to protect it. They want to make sure that it's lively and that there's this kind of permaculture, this biodiversity, and that the land is as healthy as possible. So it makes sense, and I'm really glad to see it happen.
Yes, you reminded me. I think it's important to state too that it's not easy to become certified organic.
Mm-hmm.
It takes, multiple years of sort of showing all of your records, everything that you've ever done. It's very expensive. And then it kind of, in a good way, it forces you to stay on track, right? Because you don't have these options of, let's say, like, you're worried about mildew and then you're just going to go spray a bunch of so you can't do that. You have to like approach the vineyard like it's this like living thing, and you're constantly taking care of it rather than kind of going in after the fact and trying to like put a band-aid on.
It's for sure a commitment. And I know that, with as large as To Kalon is, there's some really, 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 truly amazing parts of it. There's other parts where, you're driving by in the middle of the rainy season, like right now, and you kind of see puddles in the vineyard where there's actually going to be a little bit more water retention. You know that farming in those sections of the vineyards is going to be quite a bit more difficult.
You mentioned the puddles, sir. I was talking to a few vintners because of all this rain that we're having in January. Normal to have rain this time of year, but this has been quite a bit across the state of California. And a few of the vintners have been talking about the fact that their farming practices have really helped them in these intense rainfalls with actual absorption into the soil, right? So the fact that, I think even more than organic, we're talking about regenerative agriculture. You mentioned permaculture earlier. These farmers that are really being conscious about their land, not only because it improves the quality of the grapes, but also just agriculture at large. You're helping to work with Mother Nature instead of against Mother Nature. Well done, To Kalon Vineyard. Congratulations. Very exciting. Other big news in the champagne world. Vanessa, you're a champagne lover. Sir, I assume you're a champagne lover as well?
I do love champagne.
Yeah.
I don't drink as much of it as I usually want to, but I do like champagne quite a bit.
We've all heard of LVMH, of course. There's another very big family making massive acquisitions in the wine world, and that is the Pinot family. They're Artemis Group. So you might be, if you're in the fashion world or fashion, you might know the Pinot family owns some very big fashion houses like Gucci and Alexander McQueen. You might also know that the patriarch of that family, his daughter-in-law is Salma Hayek, but they're also adding a few new brands, in particular Champagne Jacquesson to their portfolio. So they already own Chateau Latour, Islay Vineyard, and now they've added Jacquesson to their portfolio. Very interesting move.
They're just adding jewels to their crown. You look at that list, you're talking some of the top wineries in those regions. So, I think, they're going hard into the luxury space and making the right moves. And the most surprising thing to me when I read this was I didn't know about the Salma Hayek connection.
So. You two are so much more in the know than I am. I'm like, wow, Salma Hayek. I'm like, okay, wow.
Last thing I want to talk about, Vanessa, I think you're probably as obsessed with skincare as I am. Is that a safe assumption? Sir, I don't know. Where do you stand on skincare?
I think I wash my car with the same soap that I use on my face. So I think we're good.
Drinking a glass of organic red wine every day can give you clearer, younger looking skin. Did you know this, Vanessa?
I didn't, but it makes a lot of sense in retrospect. Yes. So, because
according to Drinks Business, and this is an interesting article, not in a sense there's a lot of like interesting nuggets, but like it's clear that this is sort of a plug for Brad Pitt's latest project, which is a skincare project. It says research shows that drinking a glass of organic red wine every day can give you clearer, younger skin. Thanks to the high levels of antioxidants, wine can help protect your skin against the damage caused by free radicals. Blah, blah, blah. Essentially, this is just a way to talk about Brad Pitt's new Le Domaine skincare, which is infused with active ingredients GSM-10 and Pro GR3. This is not the first time that wine extracts and some of the wine raw materials or recycled materials are being used for skincare. In fact, I'm a huge Caudalie fan. I don't know if you've ever used.
I was just about to say that. I love that. Yes.
I will say Codally is significantly less expensive than what Brad Pitt is peddling. I think it's like almost $300 for the serum.
Wow.
And listen, I'm happy to try anything. So if the folks out there at Le Domaine want to send Vanessa and I a little care package, you're welcome to do so. We'll provide you addresses and anything else you need. We'll even talk about it on here if you want. But I am super curious. And it seems like more and more wineries are kind of getting into this like lifestyle regime, like I think the other thing is like how to make use of some of the byproduct of winemaking, which is kind of cool.
There's also kind of a big movement among especially younger consumers not to not drink at all. And, so I don't know. I'm just thinking this through. Like, I wonder if there isn't sort of a marketing push to be like, no, like, come into our world. It's healthy. You can look beautiful.
All right. Well, at this point, I think what I need to do is remind you all that if you're enjoying this podcast and you are drinking with us or not drinking with us, we would so appreciate you liking and subscribing and even reviewing it. It would mean the world to us. Leave us a little review. Doesn't have to be long, but a review, preferably the 5-star kind, super, super helpful. And we read these reviews, and we're so grateful that you guys take the time to do it. So this week's review is from Jay Monio, who said, "This podcast has quickly become my favorite to listen to. Amanda and Vanessa are funny, knowledgeable, and seem very down to earth." That's really nice. Thank you. They share great information, and I learn something new every episode. That is the goal, so that's good to hear. The guests have all been great as well. My wife and I just joined the Wine Access Club. Yay! And are excited to drink along with you. Thanks for so many great shows. Oh, so great to hear. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the kind words, and thanks for joining in on the fun with the wine club. We're having so much fun doing it. And if you are not a part of the wine club, well, we have a wine club associated with this podcast in which we send you one of the bottles from every episode. It's wonderful. Vanessa and I select the wines. We have a lot of fun. We drink them on the show. And we love seeing some of the Instagrams and the reviews that you guys are leaving about how much you guys are enjoying drinking along with us, because ultimately that's the goal. We just want you guys to hang out with us and drink, which is super fun. We're going to head right into this episode, so grab your wines if you're drinking with us, and we'll see you in 1 second. All right, well, hopefully everyone has their wines. You're drinking with us, because today is all about tasting and assessing wines. I'm sure both of you have very formulaic or maybe semi-formulaic ways of doing this. But before I jump into how we actually do that, I want to talk about these wines because we're not tasting them blind today. You guys will know what they are, and we're going to kind of take you through them, how we would assess them, how we would rate them, what we would be looking for in particular. And then, of course, if we were blind tasting them, what some of those call outs are that we'd be looking for. So we've got 2 wines on this episode. The first is the 2018 Smith Madrone Riesling from Spring Mountain. I think all 3 of us are fans of Smith Madrone. Vanessa, you want to talk a little bit about this wine?
Yeah, sure. So Smith Madrone is founded in the 1970s, I think 1971, by Stuart Smith. So Smith and then Madrone is actually the name of a type of tree that's on the property. Spring Mountain is an AVA. It's on the western side of Napa Valley, and it's really characterized by elevation. So most of the vineyards are, I think, between like 1,300 and 2,000 feet in elevation, which kind of lifts this out of the sort of warmer air that can settle in the valley, on the valley floor. But this is really cool wine because less than 1% of all of Spring Mountain is planted to Riesling.
But it used to have like a bigger, it used to be actually a fairly widely planted grape in Napa Valley. It's just sort of gone by the wayside in favor of other varieties like Cabernet, right?
Well, I think it's all about money, right? Because people can charge higher bottle prices for Cabernet than they can for Riesling. So yeah. So when you think about it like that, especially, to continue to make a wine like this, really shows their love and their devotion for this variety, because yeah, for sure they could probably plant that those acreage to Cabernet and make a little bit more bank, but it's beautiful. And I think for anyone who's tasting at home or wondering, this is a dry Riesling. So I think a lot of times we think about Rieslings being sweet, but this is not. I'm a huge fan. I mean, sir, what do you think about the Smith Madrone Riesling?
It's delicious. I was telling Amanda a little bit earlier last week, I think it was, that I haven't tasted it in a few years. And gosh darn it, it's delicious. Clean, refreshing, bright, crisp. It's got a little more focus than I think I remember. Maybe I was drinking some of the older vintages last time. But even here with 4 years of vintage age, it's lively and it's vibrant, and it's everything that I'd want in like a really crisp domestic Riesling.
I think they do have, like, from year to year, may have a little bit of residual sugar here and there just for balance. It kind of varies year to year, but you don't feel it, and I think that's the important
No.
part. And as we talk about these wines later when we actually start assessing them, I would love for us to kind of talk about sweetness in wines like this. I specifically chose Riesling because I would think Riesling is such a great grape to start with when you're tasting. It gives you so much aromatically. There's something really unique about it. And from, it's obviously Somm bait, right? Like, name me a Somm that doesn't love Riesling, right? So we're all always happy to have a little Riesling in our glass. The second wine, I actually would love Sur to talk about this one,
Yes.
because if you don't know anything about Sur, the one thing you need to know is he is truly obsessed with Italian wine, and specifically Barolo, in a way that I think no one will ever come close to. So we've got the 2018 Aldo Conterno Barolo. And in fact, when I asked Sur what he thought the second wine should be, I text Vanessa and I was like, he's going to say Barolo, right? And she was like,
Yep.
yeah. And he was like, Aldo Conterno Barolo. Great. We win. So, Sur, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about this Barolo, why you chose it, and what's going on with it.
I think it's absolutely stunning. It's rich, and I've had mine in a decanter now since probably around 8 a.m. And just because I knew it was going to gain a little bit more clarity, and it was going to kind of shed some of its kind of, it was a little bit kind of like me when I woke up this morning, a little bit groggy. It's kind of like waiting to kind of come together and kind of like, be a little more crisp and sharp. And it really is in the glass doing that so very nicely. Just beautiful little vineyard, not little vineyard at all, actually. It's a fairly large vineyard within Monforte. And the Aldo Conterno folks, they actually live right there in the middle of this vineyard site in this little cottage, like little farm cottage called Il Favot. And they make a bottling called Il Favot. And it's their kind of like their declassified Longue Nebbiolo vines, which is absolutely stunning for right around 45,
It's one of my
50
favorite
bucks.
wines from Wine Access.
It's such a great value.
Because we're dealing with an Italian wine, which is a European label, I think it's really important to talk about that label and talk about the region a little bit. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with, like, how American wines are labeled, which, it's kind of basically any way you want, right? There's a few laws here and there, and, in terms of stating the variety on the label and stating the region. But it's a little bit more specific and a little bit more complicated when it comes to Italian wines in particular. In fact, I think some people are very intimidated. I know for myself, I was very intimidated by Italian labels because there's a lot of information on there. But I think it's important to talk a little bit about this label and what information it actually gives us on here without even opening the wine.
It's funny. So you have a wine bottle here, and you have the producer name, and then you have the area where it comes from, Barolo, right? And so and on here you also have something that says Bussia, and without even telling you, the Italians are like saying, "Hey, here's all this information," but we're not really telling you that much about it. You kind of have to decipher. You have to kind of be in the know a little bit, unfortunately. And so, if you look down a little bit farther, you can see underneath the Aldo Conterno, it says Monforte di Alba. That's where they're from. That's a little village. There's 11 different villages within Barolo, Monforte being one of the most prominent. And they're not even telling you that the grape varietal here is 100% Nebbiolo. They're telling you the vintage. They're telling you who they are, the producer, which in most European labels, you'll see that the producer name is pretty prominent, as it says Poderi Aldo Conterno. And his sons are now, taking over this for Aldo. And it's not saying, hey, this is the grape, or anything like that. You kind of have to know, hey, I'm in Barolo, I'm drinking Nebbiolo. And there's no real easy way around that, other than the fact that everybody has Google at their fingertips at this point. And so just know that if you love Barolo or Barbaresco or many other of the DOCs or DOCGs within Italy, Nebbiolo is the grape that you're enjoying.
Learning about wine, it is kind of annoying at first sometimes with, European wine regions, where you do have to just do a little legwork. But then once you know it,
Yeah.
So it's a fun pursuit.
I always recommend just sort of focusing in on a region, even a grape within a particular region, to start to get to know it, get to know everything about that. And I think Italy, even though it can be really taxing and really overwhelming, is a good place to start because the labeling is very systematic, right? Like there are clear cut rules. I think Barolo is a great place to start. I'm sure Sir would agree with that. And then the producer, Aldo Conterno, I think you mentioned, is the son of Giacomo Conterno, so a very famed producer. And so style-wise, also, I think we should talk a little bit about what's happening in the region of Barolo. You have your more classic producers and you have some more modern producers. And so where would you classify this one? And what would you say is the difference between like a more classic and more modern producer, traditional, more modern producer?
I would say like the early 2000s, like the biggest, I think, distinction there was the use of new French oak. Um, Traditionally, these wines have been in large casks, like 1,000, 1,200 liters, and even larger than that, and they'd be fermented in large oak. And now they've gone down into smaller barrels on the modern side of this equation. They've gone down into sometimes 225-liter barrels, which is what they would use over in Bordeaux, and it'd be French oak. And it changes the entire composition of Nebbiolo. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. If you're a traditionalist and you really like, that the texture of Nebbiolo, a smaller barrel is going to have what they call a larger oxygen transfer rate, OTR. And what happens there is you're going to have a larger surface area in a smaller barrel to oxygen, because you're going to have a smaller volume of wine in contact with the oak, and the oak itself is somewhat breathable. It's going to allow some air in, some air out. I mean, it's not always airtight, but it should be for the most part. But you're talking about a faster development when you have a higher oxygen transfer rate of your wine than if it was, say, in stainless steel, where you can control if there's any oxygen coming in. You can put some inert gas over it, and it's all sealed and it's all nice and tight. Probably like this Smith Madrone Riesling was made, is my guess.
You were talking about traditional versus modern, and I think it's one of those things that's, I always like to bring it back to like how would someone in a restaurant or someone in a store go about utilizing some of this information? And I think when we're talking about traditional versus modern, that is something that you can use when you're talking to the som or talking to the salesperson to say, hey, I really like a more traditional style Barolo, or I like something a little bit more modern, and that's very translatable for someone in the wine industry. So I just want to point that out, as we're talking. Keep that in the back of your mind. If Barolo is your thing and you want to dive deeper into it, that's a really good way to sort of separate out what you want from what you don't want. I want to talk a little bit about what your methods are for tasting. And so I think everyone has a different school of thought when we're professionally tasting wine, which we're kind of doing today. Um, what is your thought on tasting a bottle super fresh versus like you pull the cork, you pour the wine versus tasting it after it's been open for since 8 o'clock this morning? Do you think it's better to taste, when it's had some time to open and breathe, or where's your stance on that?
Well, I can say for what we do at Wine Access, let's say, because we write all of our own tasting notes,
Mhm.
is we don't like decant the wines or anything first. Like we taste them poured right out of the bottle, because we think for the consumer at home, we want to give a really truthful experience of what you might have if you just pour it from the bottle. But we'll also see what happens over time, and often put that in the tasting note, like over time this happens, or we give you a recommendation for decanting if we think so. But for tasting purposes, we're not leaving them open before we assess them.
Sir, when you're going through, obviously you're not tasting the way that you were when you may be studying for the MS exam, but um, when you were doing that, were you opening the bottles fresh and tasting them, or were you letting them sit? I'm just curious because I think this is an interesting question that I used to get a lot when we were tasting wines to serve at restaurants. Some distributors, reps would come in. They're like, "Oh, I decanted this wine last night," and I'm like, well, that's really nice, like for you, but like I've got guests in the restaurant who are going to be opening this and drinking it within 30 minutes to an hour. So like super unhelpful for me to figure out what this wine is going to taste like for them. I'm curious because, you worked in restaurants, you've gone through the MS program. Where do you kind of stand on that?
I think you hit it right on the head, Amanda. I would not actually consider wines that were open from, I mean, I would allow wines to be open that day, but when wines came in and they were, clearly been open for like a day or two, you could always pick that up with enough experience. And you just really got to understand exactly what your guest is going to get. the authenticity of us sitting down around a judging panel and tasting all these wines right when the corks are being pulled and knowing exactly where they're at, and us even tasting wine saying, okay, this is going to be a 2-hour open before this wine's really in its spot. And then, we're sitting there tasting, sometimes 50, 60, sometimes 80 wines. Those are long days. And we go back to wines quite often. The judging panel, we're like, here it is, it's right here. And we're like, yeah, we knew it was going to happen. So it's really important when you're actually assessing a wine, I think, to have it within that first hour.
Well, I want to get into the actual tastings of these wines, and I kind of want to set the stage for everyone at home with what you should be doing. So I don't know how you guys work. I know for me, when I was taught, we have the grid, which of course, as I mentioned, you can pull up so you can kind of taste along with us. Vanessa went through the Master of Wine program. Sir went through the Quarter Master Sommeliers, as did I. They're slightly different in how those wines are assessed. But I think, to start, and I think you would both agree, if you're professionally assessing wines in that manner, grab a white sheet of paper, because you're going to want to examine these glasses over something that, is easy to see the color. Also, stem wise, I think I should point out the fact that I am drinking out of Vanessa's favorite water glass right now. As she's mentioned on previous episodes, this is unintentional. So I've got a stemless wine glass. If that's what you have at home, that's totally fine. But for the purposes of what we're doing, highly recommend getting wine glasses with an actual stem. For all the reasons that we've mentioned before, right? You're going to warm up the glass with your hand, which is going to affect how it tastes. You also kind of want to be able to see it. You want to be able to swirl it, and so your hands kind of get in the way. So make sure you have a glass with the stem if you can. What are your preferred wine glasses to taste out of? Are you guys? I always like to taste out of all-purpose wine glasses to kind of eliminate a variable. Are you kind of in that same vein?
I taste out of an all-purpose glass when assessing wine. If you're watching it at home, so these are the glasses that I used for the MW exam. Fun fact: you have to bring your own glasses to the MW exam. And this is what I use for all wines. So we're tasting, we're tasting sparkling wines, sweet wines, fortified wines, all types of still wines. But I just use this same glass, and it's the same glass I use if I'm tasting at home now.
I mean, I'm not really blind tasting, but I do use the exact same glass, usually an all-purpose glass when I'm blind tasting wines. But I have myself a Burgundy glass that I use for Nebbiolo.
Nice.
And then I have myself a little white wine glass here. It's a Zalto. Oh, no, it's a Sophia Wald for the Riesling. And just, I
love those glasses.
I like this shape. It kind of just like really kind of compacts the aromatics and makes the Riesling smell a little bit more focused for me. And then this kind of allows the volume of that Nebbiolo a lot of times has kind of stretch out, if you will, do a little bit of yoga and kind of be more ethereal and kind of lift out of the glass.
Yeah, so Sir has the glasses that you would utilize if you are just enjoying these wines at home or in a restaurant. Vanessa has the glass that you would use if you were professionally assessing, which is the white wine glass or the all-purpose glass, which is a very simple glass. Feel free, we've got these episodes on YouTube, so feel free to reference those and then also check out our Instagram if you want to see what those look like in action. So we've got your glassware, you've got your white paper. Spittoons, where are we on the spitting of the wines while you're tasting?
I mean, I'm not spitting this morning, but but yes, of course. I mean, for when we're assessing wines, either for wine access or certainly when studying, we would spit everything. Yeah, I mean, maybe if it was like really delicious Chablis, I might have a little sip, but no. I mean, obviously, you're taking an exam. You need to have your wits about you, especially the number of wines that you're tasting. So we, professionally, we spit the wines out for assessment.
I have to give a shout out to Lara Koffer, who is our associate producer on this podcast and also does an amazing job at Wine Access. She's the best. She actually mentioned something about spitting. She said, anecdotally, I've heard that spitting helps you remember flavors because it forces your brain to pay attention. As our ancestors ate and spit poison berries, we evolved to remember things that we didn't want to swallow. She said, I can't find anything to back up this claim, but I think it's a really interesting point and one that I'd be like, even if you didn't have any factual information, that makes sense to me. So on this spitting thing. And I also, I think when you're professionally tasting wines, spitting is obviously encouraged so that you remember what you're actually tasting from like a don't get drunk standpoint. So let's pretend that we are in an exam. I hate to give you guys a little PTSD, but like for the purposes of both of your faces were like, oh God, no, not again.
It's just a different mode.
It's different mode. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you've never seen this being done, it's totally worth giving the movie Somm a watch so you can see it in action. It's, for the MS exam, it's 6 wines. You've got 25 minutes to go through all of them and deduce what they are via this grid. Vanessa, how many wines did you have to taste for your exam? I know it's a little different.
We taste 36.
It's more.
Yeah. Over the course of 3 days. So we do 3 flights.
If we're just starting with the 3 tiers of the grid, you've got sight, smell, and taste. So if you're starting to look at the wine, eye placement, is there a particular place that you like to look initially when you are tasting wine?
I look to the center of the glass, and then I look to the outer rim of the glass, and then I kind of just take like a top view, and I kind of look and see if there's any kind of variations. It's when I look at sight, sight is just, it's giving me some clues, literally sometimes into age and to the concentration of grape, and with the white wine, it's usually telling me age. If it's darker, a lot of times it's going to be a little bit older. With red wines, it usually tells me, some clues. It tells me lots of different clues. I mean, with the grid that I have right here in front of me, this is actually, it's very kind of closely based off of the MS exam. This is something that I put together myself. When you get to the master level, you kind of really, you learn how to master this on your own. You don't really usually take anybody else's. You take everything from everybody else, but then you synthesize it into what is your own. And so this is mine. And so, I mean, even here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different boxes just in sight. And you're supposed to spend about 15 seconds on it. It's brightness, clarity, color, concentration, gas, sediment, rim variation, and viscosity. Right. But
I like how you just rattled those off. You're like, I know.
but only maybe maybe 5 or 6 will apply to each wine, or maybe all of them will apply to each wine. I highly doubt that there's going to be any gas inside of this Nebbiolo or any Nebbiolo that I taste, or I'm going to go and call it faulty. At least in terms of what's traditional for Nebbiolo. But I don't spend usually too much time on site, especially I think as a beginner.
Because it doesn't really tell you much in terms of quality, right? Like if you're looking at the wine in this systematic approach that we're taking, the only thing that's really helpful for is deducing what the wine is if you don't know what it is. It can't really tell you much other than that,
exactly.
right? Like, so when you've got the sight grid, you've got clarity, concentration, the color of the wines, some of the colors that you might find in a white wine. And so let's grab our Smith Madrone Riesling and kind of assess the color of this wine. So you've got for colors on white wines, silver, green, and copper are your secondaries. But what you're looking for is water white, straw, yellow, and gold. Where would you put this?
I think this is in a kind of a pale gold kind of color. It's like a light gold, if you will. It's on the deeper yellow side, but it's not browning by any means.
Clarity is clear,
absolutely
right?
clear.
There's nothing
crystal.
in here. Crystal clear. Concentration. Where would you put this guy? Pale, medium, deep?
It's medium. It's medium pale gold, pale medium gold, I would say. I mean,
okay.
You can
and if you were blind tasting this, what would those 3 things tell you about the wine?
Okay, so I would say that it's not going to be something like a very, very young white wine from a cold region. Generally, those wines are meant to be, they don't really see very much air. A lot of times when a wine starts out its life, with like a gold color, a lot of times that means that it's been exposed to some kind of oxygen. It could be in the use of some kind of neutral barrel or some kind of new barrel.
When we're looking at this wine, it obviously looks very beautiful, looks very delicious. So let's start smelling this wine. Vanessa, how do you like to smell? Do you like, I was always taught to like smell on the sign of a cross. Do you have a method for how you like to smell your wines?
So I do. Well, obviously, I always swirl the glass. But I think Sur and I, we have a slightly different way that we do this. But I think it's sort of similar, which is that I kind of breathe first through my nose and then I open my mouth and inhale there too. So, and I didn't actually like learn this from, I actually noticed later as I was tasting, I was like, oh, I didn't even know I was doing that. But yeah, I find that like, I kind of start And then towards the end, I open my mouth and I continue to kind of breathe it in and stir to something similar, but it's actually much more entertaining.
Do tell, sir.
I do actually get I get teased. I guess tease is probably a more appropriate way of saying this, but I start with my mouth and my jaw kind of opening, almost like a fish, like oh whoa whoa whoa. I'm smelling the wine in as I'm opening and closing my jaw, which almost like a bellow on a fire. It
Okay.
draws air in, and then pushes it out, pulls air in, pushes it out. You're just using your jaw muscles. I mean, you could be not breathing, holding your breath, and opening and closing your jaw, and you can feel the air going in and out of the back of like your retronasal, way back here in the back of your throat, and that's where you're going to have the most sensitive kind of uh, aromatic receptors in your body. So I'm utilizing just jaw muscles, which, I'm used to, everyone's used to eating. So it's like second nature. I'm smelling while I'm actually bringing those aromatics in through my nose and pushing them out through my mouth, in and out, in and out. And I'm getting just a really kind of clear kind of picture of what the wine is doing.
Yeah, if you're not watching this on YouTube right now, like you're missing out because this is fascinating to watch. And I'm not making fun of you. I think people that have found a way, something that works for them, that is theirs, that you can use time and time. That's a brilliant thing to see in life. If you're starting out and you're just wanting to get a sense for like what all this is, the thing that I would encourage you to do is get comfortable sticking your nose in the glass. Believe it or not, that is like the hardest thing for people to get comfortable with because it feels weird.
I would say I think the thing that people are equally uncomfortable with is actually like swishing the wine around, actually. So I think maybe putting your nose in the glass, but I think that's kind of the bigger one where, I do if I lead tastings or I do videos, for our wine clubs and stuff, if you watch those, you're probably sick of hearing me say that, but I'll always say like really like like let it touch every corner of your palate. Like really sit with it, swish it around. Because if you're just like down the hatch, I mean, you're getting 10% of what that wine has to offer.
We've talked about the technique of smelling, but what is it that we're actually smelling for? If you look at the grid, you'll notice, is this wine sound? We're looking for wine faults, including TCA. This is what we colloquially call a wine as being corked. That doesn't mean that there's cork in the wine. TCA is actually what we're talking about. What are some of your tip-offs for TCA?
Like wet cardboard, I think is the way that you can think about it. And different people have different sensitivities to it as well. And so sometimes, you'll open a bottle and one person will say, I don't think it's corked. And you'll have other people at the table saying this is definitely corked, So it can vary. I will say a trick though, if you're not sure, because sometimes I'm sure, sir, this happens to you too. You're like, I'm not quite sure. But if you leave it in the glass, like put it aside and come back to it after a little, and it will definitely show more TCA over time if you're not sure.
Yeah, it doesn't get better with time. That's not one of those things that you're like, let me just see if it improves. Like it will not improve. It will only continue to worsen. Mm-hmm. I used to let people like, well, just decant it. It'll be fine. I'm like, no, that's the opposite of what you want to do. It's a completely innocuous thing. I mean, it's natural. It happens. I think what is it, like 1 in 100 bottles are infected with TCA. One of the other, and so wet dog, wet cardboard, wet newspaper, that kind of grandma's basement. Anytime you get those things, that's usually a good clue that the wine is probably not sound, that it might have some TCA. At that point, we've talked about this in other episodes before. At that point, what you want to do is take that cork, put it back in the wine, and take it to where you got it and say, this wine is corked. They will give you a credit for that bottle or give you a new bottle. If it's from Wine Access, same deal. Call them up, let them know it's corked. There's nothing wrong with the wine itself. It's not a bad producer necessarily. Sometimes you have rare examples in which wineries can have a bad run of corks or something like that, but it has nothing to do with bad winemaking or anything like that. It has everything to do with the cork. Brettanomyces, or what we affectionately refer to as Brett. This is another one where some people are really sensitive and some people are not sensitive. Some people like it. This is kind of like a friendly fault.
Yeast is obviously super important in winemaking. It's what turns sugar into alcohol. So fermentation, for anyone at home, is yeast consume the sugars in the grapes, and the byproducts are alcohol and CO2. That's Saccharomyces. But Brettanomyces is another strain of yeast, but it's a spoilage yeast essentially. So it's can live in wineries. It can live in barrels. It's not going to hurt you. It's not dangerous, but at high levels, it can impact your enjoyment of the wine. And at very high levels, it can really ruin your enjoyment of a wine, but you can pick it up in some things. I think Sur said like horse blanket, you get kind of in some cases like a almost a medicinal note to it. Like over in the UK, they call it sticking plaster, which I didn't understand at first, but they mean like a
I've
Band-Aid.
never heard of that.
Yeah, I was like, what is sticking? I was picturing like
okay.
walls and
Band-Aid.
stuff. Yeah, but no, like a Band-Aid. I actually like have a healthy love for it at appropriate levels. I think it can actually add complexity to the wine. Now, there are some winemakers who would be like, absolutely not, that I would never allow a breading. But in some cases, it's maybe, a very traditional winemaker, it's an older winemaker, or just stylistically, it's can actually be part of the pleasure of it.
So those are just two examples of some faults. You've also got like oxidation, volatile acidity, or VA, EA. Those are, your shoe polish kind of smells often found in Italian wines. As we smell, what are the first things that you're looking for? Is it different types of fruits? Is it spices? Is it types of, what we would call like the variability of that fruit, or like, is that fruit cooked? Is it more on the unripe side? What are some of the things that you guys are looking for in your smelling?
I don't really go into trying to smell specific descriptors. I try and get an overall picture of the energy of a wine, of whether this wine feels like it was sun-baked or if it's almost ripe, just about ripe, perfectly ripe, hyper ripe, and then like raisinated. I'm always looking for that kind of like that energy of a wine. Is it showing me that it's youthful? Is it showing me that it's not? Is it showing me lots of energy? Is it showing me a little bit more relaxed?
One of the things I hear a lot from people who just wine lovers, or people just trying to get in, is like, I don't want to say out loud something that's wrong. I don't want to use the wrong descriptors, and use the word energy. You've used a lot of words that I think most people would, to some degree understand, or could sort of make the equation from. And when I pick up a glass, to your point, I'm not always looking for specific descriptors. In fact, I'm just kind of getting a sense for how it's smelling, like what it's telling me. I'm not necessarily looking for specifics unless we were in a blind tasting setting. So I'd love for Vanessa, I'd love for you to take on the Riesling and just kind of give me a little rundown of what it is you're smelling in this glass.
If I was assessing this for the exam, right, I'm trying to kind of notice as many things as possible at once. So I'm kind of looking for, is the fruit, to your point, fresh or dried? In this, I'm getting more fresh fruit, which can tell you the age of it.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a clue to the age, but also like if you're trying to determine like, is this wine New World or Old World? Sometimes the Old World, I would get more dried fruit notes than new, even if it was a fairly youthful wine. But on this, I'm still getting kind of pretty fresh fruit. I get a lot of citrus. I get kind of like a little bit of that sort of petrol-y note that you can get on
Mm-hmm.
Riesling. Oh, there's a very floral note to this, like a white flower note and almost like a chamomile tea.
Let's talk about Barolo, because I know, sir, I can feel you wanting to wax poetic about it. So let's talk about the nose and the Barolo.
There's so many different things to talk about when you talk about the aromatics of Nebbiolo. And for me, there's always this kind of masculine sophistication, and sometimes like the great ones, at some point in their life, they begin to also show these really beautiful feminine tones. The soft kind of like sweet rose kind of perfume with the darker, riper kind of cherry that I'm picking up off of this wine right now. And it was decanted 3.5 hours ago at this point, and it's showing all kinds of, I guess, signs that it could sit here in the decanter for well into tonight. Maybe I'm gonna drink the rest of this later on this evening with dinner, because it's got that structure, it's got that acid, it's got that tannin, and when I'm smelling this, it's offering me such an array of aromatics that just, I guess, make me think of like all things that are harmonious between the masculine and feminine sides of wine. I guess if I'm going to go ahead and apply the grid, which I haven't done for quite a while.
Yeah,
Um,
do it.
so yeah, the condition of the fruit is just ripe. The fruit aromas. I think there's some dried tart fruit, like there's some tart red cherry, and there's also some ripe dark black cherry. There's some cranberry. Um, there's some red plum. The secondary aromatics, I think, is where this wine's on full display. I
Mm.
think there's already that kind of like sweet cigar tobacco. It's tan tobacco, and it's also Colorado or Maduro tobacco, where it gets a little bit darker and a little bit sweeter. There's some kind of more new leather kind of like profile on the wine. There's plenty of rose petal, almost like the rose petal is kind of like mortar and pestle. I think there's a ripeness, there's a sweetness to the nose of the fruit.
Approaches to tasting. I was taught to sip in threes. What about you guys? How do you approach tasting? Is it first sip, second sip, third sip? What's the deal?
I usually do one and maybe a second for backup just in case. I mean, if I was tasting for the exam, because I try not to second guess myself too much. I think the more you
Mhm.
go back to it, the more you try to talk yourself maybe into it being something else. And so really listening to the first impression. So no, I just really do like one, but we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I really
Swish.
swish it around like almost like it's mouthwash.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in a professional setting or for the exam, we'd spit it out. And then I sit for a moment and I sort of make my brain turn off in terms of trying to think of descriptors for the flavors. And I just pay attention to what I'm feeling,
Mm.
to the structure of the wine. So I pay attention to like how aggressively is my mouth watering, looking for the acid, looking for the body, looking for the weight. All the flavors are supporting evidence. All the real evidence for deciphering what the wine is structural for me.
I usually just drop the wine on my palate and then I let it go around my palate. I don't really do too much swishing like inside of my mouth like a lot of people do. I'm really paying attention to how the clues that my mouth, the impression that it's giving on my tongue. And because I've done this so many thousands of times, I'm almost you know how people talk about how they go through life experiences and they're actually watching themselves have this
Mm-hmm.
experience. I'm kind of halfway in between that state, and I'm not really looking at the glass. I'm kind of like somewhere in kind of blah land, and I'm allowing the wine itself to start almost on an XY axis, start giving me colors and start giving me shapes. And the way that this happened, and you can only do this if you've done this hundreds of thousands of
Yep.
times. I don't believe that anybody at home is going to all of a sudden pick up a wine and start immediately doing this, because it's what I've developed and it works for me.
Some of the practices can be a little bit daunting, but I also think in some ways it gives a lot of people permission to just kind of play around with it, right? Like find your own way. That we have this grid in front of us, utilize it if you want, but also don't be afraid to just like sit there, as Vanessa said, and just like be with the wine. Let it come to you. Don't try to pick out specific things. Just structurally, I just kind of want to highlight a couple of things. We talked about acid. Vanessa, in what way I mean, you mentioned like different wines will give you different acidity, but when we're
Uh-huh.
talking about like generically when we're feeling acid, I feel that kind of up and down my jawline. It's, how much I'm salivating is sort of a measure of that. Are you kind of in the same camp?
Totally. It's like how aggressively I feel the saliva kind of down the sides of my cheeks here. And for people starting out, if you're not able to, sometimes you like tip your head forward and you can actually sort of feel your saliva like pooling to the front of your mouth. But yeah, that, and I had a friend who was also studying for the MW, and she would say, rather than I just notice just a very like straightforward taster, like how aggressively is my mouth watering? How fast is
Yeah.
it watering? But she would have this like double spit. So she's like, if I have to like spit twice, because like I spit the wine out and I'm still
Mm.
salivating, and then I have to spit again, that was like her calibration for high acidity.
What about sweetness? How do you look for sweetness in a wine?
Sweetness is something that will slightly linger about 10 seconds afterwards. And you're going to get the salivation and the acid's going to kind of slightly counterbalance that. Um, you know, there's a difference between ripeness in wines and the ripeness of the fruit and whether the wine is actually fermented dry, as we're talking about the yeast completely consuming all the sugar that was available inside that must, or the grape juice, and creating the wine going dry. So
It's interesting that you find sweetness later. I usually find it first. It's almost like I taste it like right here at like the front of my palate. And then it does linger for sure. But yeah, this is what's cool about it, right, Amanda? Like everyone is a
yeah,
little
Yeah.
bit, you can get there
Everyone's a little
many different
different.
ways. Yeah.
Yeah, sweet,
absolutely.
and I think sweetness sometimes can be perceived as a bad word, right?
Mhm.
Some people think of a sweet wine, and this is by no means a sweet wine, as you said, this is a commercially dry wine. We would not label this as a sweet wine. With 2 grams of residual sugar, whatever we think it is. But it is there to balance. And if you think of, the acidity in Riesling can be quite high, even though this is from a warmer place in Napa Valley, a cooler appellation that gets a little bit more rain. The acidity is still quite high in this. And so the sweetness, if it is there, is just there to support. It's there to balance. Tannin is kind of the last thing I want to talk about on the structure side of things. I think this is a word that According to my videos on TikTok, it gets a little bit confused. So we're gonna define it really quick. So tannin, it is something that you feel. I mean, some people talk about tasting tannins, but I think of it in terms of that dryness that happens in your mouth. So like if you were to take cotton balls and stick them in, and it would completely absorb all of the moisture. That sort of like tacky feeling, that kind of in your mouth. Those are the tannins at play, and so those are happening for a few different reasons. And some people like really high tannin wines, some people like really low tannin wines. Sir, where would you put the tannic structure or the tannin level of this Barolo that we have here? Because Nebbiolo can be quite high in tannin sometimes.
Yeah, I think this is probably about moderate plus. I don't quite feel the high tannins. Aldo Conterno or the Conterno label at this point is just, they do an excellent job of balancing that out. And, there's the tannins are ripe.
A few takeaways for you guys at home. What can you do to become a better taster? I think Laura put this together. Just a few in quotes things to remember, and keep tabs of the structure. So few being an acronym for fruit, earth, and wood. We talked about different types of fruit. Earthiness, those are some of the things, some of those tasting components, and wood. Those are all things that you should be looking for. And then tabs is your structure. So that tannin, acid, body, sweetness, all the things that we just touched on here. And then last, the other thing that you can do at home, there is a great video on the Wine Access YouTube channel. This is the Blicka video. Um, Vanessa, this is your baby, right? You're the Blicka queen.
Well, I use this. So I didn't invent Blicka. Blicka is something I learned when I was in the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. And then Jonathan Cristaldi, he used to be our editor, wrote the script for this Blicka video. But the Blicka video, which is really fun, it's very tongue in cheek, but it's to explain how to assess quality in wine. So Blicka is an acronym for balance, length, intensity, concentration, complexity, and ageability. Balance is like, are all those like structural components working together? Is there one thing that's just kind of jutting out, that doesn't fit into the overall like harmony of the wine? Length is the same thing as finish. So if you pay attention to like how long are you actually enjoying the flavors and the feeling on your palate of the wine after you've either spit it out or consumed it, a great wine should have a long finish, and an outstanding wine might have a finish where you're discovering new things about the wine that you hadn't even noticed before. Intensity doesn't mean all wines have to be intense to be good. It can be very light bodied. It can be quietly intense, or it can be sort of loud and bombastic, but you should notice the wine. You shouldn't have to really work to figure out what the personality of that wine is. Concentration, similarly, it doesn't mean that all wines have to be super concentrated to be high quality, but it can be almost like, a lace glove, is a sort of, a very delicate, or it can be very powerful, like iron fist. But they can both indicate quality. Complexity is really easy. It's like, how many things can I think of to talk about this? Like, am I naming one thing? Can I say, well, get like cherries, or is it like cherries, tar, leather, rose petal, cedar? And if the more you have to say about the wine on the nose or the palate, that's complexity. And then all of those things add up to the A of Blicka, which is ageability. So I kind of think of those like, if I have the majority of BLICC checked off on my kind of mental list, then I think, okay, this is a wine that could age and potentially improve with age. If I only have maybe
Hmm.
one or two of those things, probably not a wine that's going to improve or that you want to lay down for a long time. Doesn't mean it's not a delicious, enjoyable wine, because keep in mind, most wine of the world, I mean, we live in Napa Valley, Amanda and Sarah, where, obviously it's a very high quality luxury kind of wine region, but most wines in the world are not actually meant to be put down in your cellar. They're meant to be consumed kind of early and fresh and young. So you can certainly drink and enjoy wines that don't check all those boxes, but that's the kind of little cliff note version of quality assessment in wine.
Well put, and I think super helpful for people at home to just sort of condense all this information to figure out whether this, the wine that you're drinking is of quality. Of course, if you're buying from Wine Access, you never have to worry about it, because I'm sure as you've probably gathered by this point, Vanessa and Sur, they're on the wine team at Wine Access, which means they are tasting every bottle that comes through their door. And it is going through this long assessment that you guys just heard. It's conversation, it's assessment, it's going through wine by wine to see if it's worthy of being put on the site and offered to you guys at home. So really fun to get an inside look at what you guys are doing within the company. And very impressive also, I must add. Both of you obviously have a wealth of knowledge and experience under your belts. I can't thank you enough for sharing it. I think the other thing that I want to mention, because I did hint at it earlier, if you are struggling to put those words that you're smelling to your mouth, one of the things that you can do is, it's literally, to me, it's just like it's muscle memory, it's flashcard memory. Go to your farmer's market, look at recipes, start just paying attention to the daily things that you're smelling and tasting throughout your everyday life. That's the way you do it. Say it out loud. I'll often find myself in places like smelling different fruits and saying it out loud, and just, listening to maybe what's around me so that I can have, a multi-sensory experience while I'm smelling something, so that it kind of stays in my brain. But it really just, it takes time. Your palate's not broken. Your nose isn't broken. We just don't naturally have that link. So as you start to go through this journey for yourself, be more conscious about it, make that link, start to make those correlations for yourself. I think a fun word that we didn't mention today that I didn't know that Laura did, maybe you guys know the official word for swishing it around your mouth, gargling and spit. Do you know what that word for it, or that sucking in of air when you're making that duck face? Do you know what it's actually called?
No. What is it?
There's a word for it.
What is it?
I didn't know what it was either. It's called grumage. Grumag. I had no idea. It's when when you do that. Here, I'll do it it's what Nia did when we did the ASMR bit.
She's always teaching me things, Laura. I love her.
That's grumage.
Wow.
So that's your word of the day. You guys, if you're not inspired to drink with us on these episodes now, I don't know what else to tell you. Join the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast wine club. We'll be doing more stuff like this. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode, and thank you again for the suggestion. More of those are always welcome, as well as reviews and likes and comments, whether it's on YouTube or on the actual podcast itself. To the both of you, thank you for being here. Sir, what a wealth of knowledge and entertainment that you brought for us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda.
You had fun.
It was a ton of fun, actually. It's topics I haven't talked about in a long time, so it's a lot of fun.
And Vanessa, as always, I appreciate you being here. This is the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast. We are your hosts, Vanessa Conlin and Amanda McCrossin. And thank you once again to our associate producer, Laura Koffer, for all the work that you did to help us put all this information together. We'll see y'all soon. Cheers.
Cheers.